In a world where voices are weapons and silence is seen as weakness, one woman would prove that the deadliest warriors don't always make the loudest noise. What happens when the person everyone underestimates becomes the one they should have feared most? This is the story of Sarah Chun, a woman whose silence concealed a storm that would shake the very foundations of military tradition and redefine what it means to be truly powerful. They called her Ghost, not out of respect, but mockery. 8 highly trained Marines thought they knew what silence meant. They were about to learn they knew nothing at all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California. Sarah Chun stood at attention with 37 other candidates. Her dark eyes focused straight ahead while the drill instructor's voice boomed across the grinder. She had been silent for exactly 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not by choice, but by circumstance that had carved her into something harder than the concrete beneath her boots. The other candidates whispered among themselves when they thought no one was listening. How's she supposed to give orders? What if she needs to call for backup? This is just political correctness gone wrong. Sarah heard every word, felt every doubt like a physical weight. But doubt had become her companion long ago, and she had learned to carry it without stumbling. Petty Officer Martinez, the lead instructor, approached their formation with the predatory grace of a man who had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. His weathered face showed no emotion as his eyes swept over the candidates. When his gaze landed on Sarah, it lingered. She could feel the question in his stare, the same one everyone had. What was a mute woman doing in Navy SEAL training? Candidates, Martinez barked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Today begins your journey into hell. Most of you won't make it past the first week. Some of you will quit before lunch. His eyes found Sarah again. And some of you probably shouldn't have been here in the first place. The insult was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but clear enough that every candidate understood its target. Sarah felt the heat of their stares, the weight of their judgment. She had faced worse, much worse. At 18, Sarah had been a different person entirely. She had been pursuing a degree in linguistics at UC Berkeley, fluent in 7 languages, with dreams of becoming a translator for the State Department. She had been vocal, passionate, always ready with a quick joke or a fierce argument. Her voice had been her greatest weapon, her most treasured tool. Then came a night that changed everything. She had been walking home from her job at a local bookstore when 3 men cornered her in an alley. The attack itself was brutal, but it was what happened during her recovery that truly broke her. The trauma had damaged her vocal cords, but worse, it had stolen her ability to speak. Not physically. The doctor said her voice would return with time and therapy, but psychologically, the words simply wouldn't come. Months passed in silence, then years. Her parents had been supportive at first, then frustrated, then quietly resigned. Friends drifted away when conversations became one-sided struggles. The world, it seemed, had no place for a woman who couldn't speak. But in that silence, Sarah discovered something unexpected. She began to listen, really listen, in ways she never had before. She heard the subtle changes in breathing that indicated fear. She noticed the micro-expressions that revealed lies. She observed body language that spoke louder than any voice. The idea of joining the military had come from an unlikely source. Her physical therapist, a former Marine named James Rodriguez. During one of their sessions, as Sarah struggled through exercises designed to strengthen her damaged throat, he had mentioned something that stuck with her. You know, he had said, some of the best warriors I knew in combat were the quiet ones. They saw everything, heard everything, and when the time came to act, they were deadly. Rodriguez had introduced her to mixed martial arts as part of her therapy. Physical strength will give you confidence, he had explained, and confidence might help your voice return. The voice never returned, but the strength did. Sarah discovered that her body could speak in ways her voice couldn't. She learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, boxing, and tactical shooting. Each discipline became a new language, one she could master without saying a word. The transition from civilian to sailor had been challenging enough without the added burden of her condition. Boot camp had been brutal, but Sarah had endured worse. She had learned to communicate through gestures, written notes, and an intuitive understanding of what needed to be done. Her drill instructors had been skeptical at first, but her performance had been undeniable. She scored perfect marks on every physical test, showed exceptional tactical awareness, and demonstrated a level of discipline that impressed even the most hardened veterans. Her scores had been so exceptional that she caught the attention of a Navy SEAL recruiter, Commander Patricia Walsh. Walsh was a former intelligence officer who had spent years working with special operations teams. She saw something in Sarah that others missed, not a disability, but a different kind of strength. The teams need diversity, Walsh had explained during their meeting, not just in background and experience, but in capabilities. You've learned to operate in ways that others haven't. That's not a limitation. That's an advantage. The path to SEAL training had required special accommodations and extensive psychological evaluations. Sarah had to prove that her silence wouldn't compromise team safety. She had developed an intricate system of hand signals that went beyond standard military communication. She had learned to use technology to her advantage, mastering various communication devices and apps that could translate her thoughts to speech when necessary. More importantly, she had demonstrated an uncanny ability to read situations and people. During her preliminary training, she had consistently identified threats and opportunities that others missed. Her silent observation skills had been honed by years of compensating for her voice, making her exceptionally aware of her environment. Now, standing on the grinder at BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training, Sarah faced the ultimate test of whether her unique skills would be enough. The other candidates represented the cream of military personnel. There were former Marines, Army Rangers, Air Force pararescue specialists, and Navy personnel for various specialties. All of them were vocal, confident, and skeptical of their silent teammate. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a former Marine Raider with 3 combat deployments, stood 2 positions to Sarah's left. He was everything the military traditionally valued: 6 feet of muscle and attitude, with a voice that could be heard across a battlefield. During their brief introduction period, he had attempted to engage Sarah in conversation, then grown visibly frustrated when she responded only with written notes. "This is going to be interesting," he had muttered to his neighbor, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "How's she supposed to lead a team if she can't even order coffee?" Sergeant Mike Thompson, another Marine veteran, had been less subtle in his disapproval. "I've got nothing against women in combat," he had told a group of candidates during their first meal. "But special operations requires communication. How's she going to call in air support? How's she going to coordinate with other teams? This is just setting her up to fail and potentially getting good people killed." Sarah had listened to every word, cataloged every doubt, and filed away every assumption. She had learned that people revealed their true thoughts when they believed they weren't being heard. These men saw her silence as weakness, as limitation, as disqualification. They would learn differently. The first week of BUD/S was designed to break candidates physically and mentally. The instructors pushed everyone to their limits with endless physical training, cold water immersion, obstacle courses, and sleep deprivation. Sarah found herself at a surprising advantage. Years of compensating for her voice had taught her to endure discomfort without complaint. While other candidates groaned, cursed, and verbally expressed their pain, Sarah simply endured. During log PT physical training, where teams of 6 to 8 candidates carried heavy logs through various exercises, Sarah's team initially struggled with coordination. Log PT required precise timing and communication to execute movements safely and effectively. The other candidates shouted commands and encouragement, but Sarah could only gesture and demonstrate. "This isn't working," Morrison panted during a brief rest. "We need someone who can actually call cadence." Thompson nodded in agreement. "No offense, Chun, but we're getting smoked because we can't communicate properly." Sarah pulled out her waterproof notepad and wrote quickly, "Watch my hands. Follow my rhythm. Trust the process. Trust the process." Thompson read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Lady, the process involves talking to your teammates." But as the exercises continued, something interesting happened. Sarah's gestures became more precise, more intuitive. She began to anticipate what the team needed before they knew it themselves. Her silent signals became increasingly effective, and slowly, her teammates began to understand her communication style. During one particularly challenging log carry across the soft sand, Sarah noticed that one of her teammates, Petty Officer Davis, was struggling with an injury he was trying to hide. His breathing was labored, his face pale, and his grip on the log was weakening. While the others focused on maintaining pace, Sarah adjusted her position to provide additional support without anyone noticing. She subtly shifted the log's weight distribution and modified their route to give Davis brief moments of relief. Her teammates didn't immediately recognize what she had done, but they felt the difference. The exercise became marginally easier, their formation more stable. Only later did Davis realize that Sarah had been compensating for his weakness without exposing him to the instructor's attention. "She was watching out for me," Davis told Morrison that evening. "Didn't say a word about my shoulder, just adapted to help." Morrison was beginning to reconsider his initial assessment. "Maybe there's more to this silent treatment than I thought." The obstacle course presented another challenge for Sarah's communication style. The course required teams to navigate complex structures that demanded coordination and timing. Traditional military training emphasized verbal commands and responses, but Sarah had to find alternative methods. She began using a combination of hand signals, body positioning, and what her teammates would later describe as an almost telepathic awareness of what needed to happen next. During one exercise involving a rope climb with team belaying, Sarah positioned herself as the anchor person. Without saying a word, she managed to coordinate the timing perfectly, ensuring each teammate had the support they needed exactly when they needed it. Her performance was noted by Chief Petty Officer Williams, a SEAL instructor who had been observing the teams closely. Williams had initially shared the skepticism about Sarah's presence in the program, but her consistent performance was beginning to change his mind. "Chen's got something different going on," Williams mentioned to Martinez during their evening debrief. "She's not talking, but she's communicating. Her team's performance is improving, and I think she's a big part of why." Martinez remained unconvinced. "Communication is critical in the teams, Chief. What happens when she's under fire and needs to call for help? What happens when she's leading a mission and needs to give complex orders?" "I don't know," Williams admitted, "but I'm curious to see how she handles the advanced phases." Sarah was aware of the scrutiny, the doubts, and the conversations about her abilities. Each challenge became an opportunity to prove that silence didn't equal weakness. During night navigation exercises, her heightened listening skills proved invaluable. While other candidates stumbled through the darkness, calling out warnings and directions, Sarah moved with fluid precision, using sound and subtle environmental cues to navigate terrain that challenged everyone else. Her performance during these exercises began attracting attention from unexpected sources. Captain Jennifer Hayes, the commanding officer overseeing SEAL training operations, had been monitoring Sarah's progress with particular interest. Hayes had her own history of fighting for acceptance in male-dominated military environments, and she recognized something in Sarah that went beyond simple determination. She's not trying to prove she can do everything the men can do, Hayes observed to her executive officer. She's proving she can do things differently and potentially better. That's a distinction worth noting. The water phase of training brought new challenges. Bud/S was famous for its brutal water conditioning, designed to test candidates' comfort and competence in aquatic environments. Sarah had spent months preparing for this phase, knowing that water would present unique communication challenges. During underwater, knot-tying exercises, teams had to coordinate complex tasks while holding their breath. Sarah discovered that her lack of verbal communication was actually an advantage. While other candidates wasted precious oxygen attempting to communicate underwater, Sarah relied on visual cues and physical guidance that was more effective in the aquatic environment. Her performance during drown-proofing exercises was particularly notable. These exercises required candidates to complete swimming tasks while their hands and feet were bound, simulating emergency situations. Sarah's years of compensating for her voice had developed her spatial awareness and body control to exceptional levels. She moved through the water with efficiency that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Chen's got natural water skills, noted instructor second-class Martinez during the evening assessment. Her comfort level in stress situations is remarkable. She's not fighting the environment. She's adapting to it. But it was during a particularly challenging team exercise that Sarah's unique abilities truly began to shine. The exercise involved night reconnaissance of a simulated enemy position, requiring teams to gather intelligence without detection. Success depended entirely on stealth, coordination, and the ability to adapt to changing situations without verbal communication. Sarah's team initially struggled with the mission planning phase. How do you coordinate a complex operation with a teammate who can't speak? Other teams were busy with detailed verbal briefings, discussing contingencies and backup plans. Sarah's team seemed to be at a fundamental disadvantage, but Sarah had been thinking about this challenge for months. She had developed a comprehensive system of hand signals that went far beyond standard military communication. More importantly, she had learned to read her teammates' intentions and reactions with uncanny accuracy. During the mission itself, Sarah took point position, using her heightened awareness to navigate the team through potential detection zones. Her silent movement and intuitive understanding of her teammates' capabilities allowed them to adapt to changing conditions without the verbal coordination that other teams relied upon. When they encountered an unexpected obstacle, a sentry that wasn't part of the original intelligence, Sarah's team faced a critical test. How do you coordinate a response to an unplanned threat without speaking? Sarah had anticipated this possibility. Through a series of subtle gestures and positioning, she communicated a plan that required split-second timing and absolute trust. Her teammates had to follow her lead without fully understanding her strategy until it was executed. The plan worked flawlessly. Sarah's team successfully completed their reconnaissance objective, gathered additional intelligence on the unexpected sentry, and extracted without detection. Their performance was so impressive that it drew attention from the senior instruction staff. "I've been teaching reconnaissance for 12 years," Chief Williams told Martinez after reviewing the exercise footage. "That was some of the smoothest coordination I've ever seen from a student team. And they barely made a sound the entire time." Martinez was beginning to understand that he might have misjudged Sarah's capabilities. "Maybe silence isn't always a limitation," he admitted reluctantly. As the first phase of BUD/S neared completion, Sarah had proven that she could perform at the highest levels despite her inability to speak. But she had also proven something more important. She had shown that different didn't necessarily mean inferior. Her unique approach to challenges was beginning to influence her teammates in unexpected ways. Morrison, who had been her harshest critic, found himself adopting some of Sarah's observation techniques. "She sees things the rest of us miss," he admitted to Thompson. "While we're busy talking, she's busy noticing." Thompson, despite his initial skepticism, had begun to appreciate Sarah's consistency and reliability. "She never complains, never makes excuses, just gets the job done." There's something to be said for that. But Sarah knew that her greatest challenges lay ahead. The advanced phases of SEAL training would test not just her individual capabilities, but her ability to integrate with teams in complex, high-stress situations. She would need to prove that her silence could be an asset rather than a limitation in real-world scenarios. More importantly, she would soon face a test that would challenge everything the military thought it knew about communication, leadership, and what it meant to be a warrior. 8 highly trained Marines were about to learn that the deadliest opponent is often the one you underestimate. 3 months into BUD/S training, Sarah Chun had earned something she hadn't expected: grudging respect from most of her fellow candidates. The initial skepticism hadn't completely disappeared, but her consistent performance had proven that she belonged in the program. However, respect from her immediate peers was different from acceptance by the broader military community, and Sarah was about to face her most significant challenge yet. The advanced individual training phase brought new instructors, new challenges, and, unfortunately, new prejudices. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a decorated Marine with 4 combat tours and a reputation for breaking students who didn't meet his standards, had just been assigned to cross-train with the SEAL program. His arrival marked a shift in the training environment that would test everything Sarah had worked to achieve. Rodriguez represented the old-school military mindset that viewed any deviation from traditional norms as weakness. He had heard about the mute SEAL candidate and had formed his opinions long before he ever met her. To him, Sarah represented everything wrong with the military's recent push for inclusivity. In his mind, special operations was no place for social experiments. "I don't care what anyone says," Rodriguez told his fellow instructors during their first briefing. "Combat communication is life and death. You can't coordinate airstrikes with hand signals, and you can't call for medical evacuation with a notepad. This candidate is going to get people killed." Chief Williams, who had become one of Sarah's advocates, tried to provide context about her exceptional performance. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I understand your concerns, but Chun has consistently exceeded standards in every phase of training. Her alternative communication methods have proven effective in complex scenarios." Rodriguez's expression remained skeptical. "Paper tests and training exercises are one thing, Chief. Real combat is different. When bullets start flying, soldiers need clear, immediate communication. This isn't about discrimination. It's about operational effectiveness." The philosophical divide between instructors created tension that filtered down to the candidates. Some, like Morrison and Davis, had developed confidence in Sarah's abilities through direct experience. Others remained uncertain, influenced by the obvious doubts expressed by senior personnel like Rodriguez. The situation came to a head during a multi-day exercise designed to simulate extended operations in hostile territory. The scenario involved teams infiltrating enemy-controlled areas, gathering intelligence, and coordinating with supporting elements. It was the kind of complex operation that required seamless communication between multiple units and command structures. Sarah found herself assigned to a mixed team that included several Marines who were cross-training with the SEAL program. The team leader was Corporal Kevin Zhang, a highly competent Marine with excellent technical skills, but little experience working with unconventional communication methods. The other team members included 2 Navy candidates Sarah had trained with and 3 Marines who had never worked with her before. The Marines represented a different military culture from what Sarah had grown accustomed to in the SEAL program. Marine training emphasized vocal aggression, clear verbal commands, and immediate verbal responses. The 3 Marines assigned to her team, Corporals James Wilson, Anthony Martinez, no relation to the instructor, and David Kim, had distinguished themselves in their own units through traditional leadership and communication styles. During the mission planning phase, the cultural differences became immediately apparent. The Marines naturally took charge of the briefing process, speaking loudly and confidently about tactics, timing, and contingencies. Sarah's usual method of contributing through written notes and gesture-based suggestions seemed inadequate in this environment. "Okay, Chin," Corporal Wilson said during the briefing, his tone professional but slightly condescending. "We appreciate that you have your own way of doing things, but this mission requires real-time coordination. How are you planning to communicate with command if we run into trouble?" Sarah pulled out her communication device, a ruggedized tablet that could convert text to speech and interface with military communication systems. She had used similar devices throughout her training, and they had proven effective for most situations. She typed her response and activated the speech function. "I have multiple backup communication methods," the electronic voice stated. Text-to-speech systems, pre-programmed emergency messages, and hand signal protocols that team members can relay vocally when necessary. Corporal Martinez frowned at the artificial voice. "That's great for planned scenarios, but what about when things go wrong? What about split-second decisions? What about when your fancy computer breaks down?" The questions were valid, and Sarah knew they reflected genuine concerns rather than simple prejudice. But they also revealed assumptions about how military operations actually functioned. In her experience, the most critical communications in high-stress situations were often nonverbal anyway. Body language, positioning, and intuitive teamwork frequently mattered more than vocal commands. Sarah wrote a response on her notepad. "Most critical combat communication is nonverbal. Hand signals, positioning, timing. Voice is often secondary." Corporal Kim read the note aloud, then shook his head. "Maybe in SEAL operations, but Marines coordinate differently. We need clear verbal commands and immediate vocal confirmation. Lives depend on it." Team leader Zhang tried to bridge the gap between the different approaches. "Look, we all want the same thing: mission success and everyone coming home. Let's figure out a communication protocol that works for everyone." But the underlying tension remained. The Marines weren't convinced that Sarah's methods would work under real pressure, and Sarah could sense their lack of confidence in her abilities. She had faced skepticism before, but this felt different. These weren't just doubts about her capabilities. They were fundamental disagreements about how military operations should function. The exercise began before dawn with team insertion via helicopter into simulated enemy territory. The first phase required movement to an observation post where they would conduct surveillance on a mock enemy facility. The terrain was challenging, dense forest with limited visibility and multiple potential detection zones. Sarah had requested point position, knowing that her enhanced observation skills would be valuable for navigation and threat detection. But Zhang assigned her to the middle of the formation, citing concerns about communication if she encountered unexpected obstacles. "No offense, Chun," Zhang explained, "but if you're on point and run into trouble, how do you warn the rest of us quickly enough?" The decision frustrated Sarah, but she understood the reasoning. Zhang was operating within his training and experience, and those didn't include working with non-vocal team members. She would need to prove her value through performance rather than argument. As they moved through the forest, Sarah noticed that the team's communication style was indeed different from what she had experienced in SEAL training. The Marines used more frequent verbal check-ins, more detailed position reports, and more explicit coordination commands. Their approach was effective, but it also created more noise and required constant verbal interaction. About 2 hours into the movement, Sarah noticed something the others had missed. The point man, Corporal Wilson, was following a trail that showed signs of recent use. Broken vegetation that was too fresh, disturbed soil that indicated foot traffic within the last few hours. The simulated enemy was supposed to be using this area, but according to their intelligence briefing, it should have been abandoned overnight. Sarah tried to signal Zhang about her observations, but the team was focused on maintaining their movement pace and verbal communication rhythm. Her attempts to get Zhang's attention were interpreted as routine position checks rather than urgent intelligence. 20 minutes later, Wilson walked into what would have been an ambush in a real-world scenario. The exercise controllers had positioned opposing force members along the trail, and Wilson's team was eliminated for failing to detect the obvious signs of enemy presence. After the exercise reset, Zhang gathered his team for an after-action review. "We got sloppy with our reconnaissance. Wilson, you needed to pay more attention to trail signs." Sarah wrote quickly on her notepad. "I tried to warn about fresh sign 20 minutes ago. Trail showed recent activity." Zhang read the note and paused. He looked back at Wilson, who confirmed that he hadn't noticed the signs that Sarah had spotted. "Chun, why didn't you communicate this more clearly?" Sarah wrote another note. "I attempted to signal multiple times. Team was focused on vocal communication protocols and missed visual signals." The Marines exchanged glances that revealed their frustration. From their perspective, Sarah had failed to communicate critical information effectively. From Sarah's perspective, the team's communication style had prevented them from receiving important intelligence. "This is exactly what we were worried about," Corporal Martinez said. "In a real situation, people would have died because of communication breakdown. But Corporal Kim, who had been observing more carefully, offered a different perspective. Wait a minute. Chun spotted the signs that our point man missed. The problem wasn't her ability to gather intelligence. The problem was our inability to receive her input." The observation created an uncomfortable moment of reflection for the team. They had been so focused on maintaining their preferred communication style that they had ignored valuable input from a team member who processed environmental information differently. Zhang, to his credit, recognized the leadership lesson in the situation. "Okay, we need to figure out how to integrate different communication styles more effectively. Chun, show us exactly how you were trying to signal the trail sign information." Sarah demonstrated the hand signal she had used, the positioning changes she had attempted, and the visual cues she had been trying to communicate. To the Marines, her signals had looked like routine movement adjustments. But when she explained their meaning, the team began to understand the sophistication of her alternative communication system. "It's like learning a new language," Wilson admitted. "The information was there, but we didn't know how to interpret it." The remainder of the exercise became a learning experience for both sides. Sarah began to understand how Marine communication protocols functioned and why they emphasized vocal confirmation for critical information. The Marines began to appreciate the value of Sarah's enhanced observation skills and the efficiency of her nonverbal communication methods. During the final phase of the exercise, a simulated assault on the enemy facility, the team faced their most challenging communication test. The scenario required coordinating multiple moving elements, managing simulated supporting fire, and adapting to changing tactical situations in real time. Zhang had developed a hybrid communication approach that leveraged both vocal commands and Sarah's visual signal system. For routine coordination, the team used standard Marine protocols. But for detailed environmental observations and tactical adjustments, they had learned to recognize and interpret Sarah's more sophisticated signaling methods. The approach proved highly effective. Sarah's enhanced situational awareness allowed the team to identify and exploit tactical opportunities that other teams missed. Her ability to communicate complex spatial relationships through positioning and gesture provided Zhang with tactical options that wouldn't have been apparent through vocal communication alone. When the team encountered an unexpected obstacle during the assault phase, additional opposing forces that weren't part of the original intelligence, Sarah's communication methods proved particularly valuable. She was able to relay detailed information about enemy positions, movement patterns, and potential vulnerabilities without alerting the opposing forces to her team's presence. She's like having a scout who can report without breaking operational security, Zhang observed to his fellow team leaders after the exercise. Once you learn to read her signals, it's incredibly valuable intelligence. The Marines on Sarah's team had undergone a significant shift in perspective. What had initially seemed like a communication limitation had revealed itself to be a different kind of tactical advantage. Sarah's methods required more preparation and practice to integrate effectively, but they provided capabilities that traditional vocal communication couldn't match. Corporal Wilson, who had been most skeptical initially, summarized the team's evolving understanding. "Chin doesn't communicate like us, but that doesn't mean she communicates worse than us. It just means different." The success of the integrated approach attracted attention from the instruction staff, including Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. He had been observing the exercise with particular focus on Sarah's team, expecting to document the communication failures that would support his position about her unsuitability for special operations. Instead, Rodriguez found himself watching a team that had developed innovative solutions to complex communication challenges. Sarah's team had completed their objectives more efficiently than several teams using traditional methods, and they had gathered intelligence that other teams had missed. "I don't understand what I'm seeing," Rodriguez admitted to Chief Williams during the exercise debrief. "This shouldn't be working as well as it is." Williams smiled slightly. "Maybe our assumptions about effective military communication need some updating, Sergeant." Rodriguez remained unconvinced about the broader implications, but he couldn't argue with the results. Sarah's team had performed exceptionally, and their innovative communication methods had contributed significantly to their success. However, Rodriguez still believed that Sarah's methods wouldn't hold up under the most extreme pressures. "Training exercises are one thing," he told Williams. "But what happens when she faces a real test? What happens when there's no time for hand signals and visual cues?" Williams understood Rodriguez's concerns, but he had been watching Sarah's development for months. "Sergeant, I think you're about to get your answer. The final evaluation phase is coming up, and it's going to test everything these candidates have learned." The final evaluation phase was designed to push candidates beyond their training and into truly challenging scenarios. It would test not just their individual skills, but their ability to function under extreme stress with unfamiliar teams in unpredictable situations. For Sarah, this phase would represent the ultimate test of whether her alternative communication methods could function in the most demanding circumstances. She had proven herself to her immediate teammates and had begun to change minds among some of the instruction staff. But she still faced skepticism from elements of the broader military community who viewed her presence as an experiment that was bound to fail under real pressure. The final evaluation would either validate everything she had worked to achieve or confirm the doubts of those who believed that special operations required traditional communication methods. Either way, Sarah knew that her next challenge would determine not just her own future, but the future of other military personnel who might seek to serve despite unconventional circumstances. She had come too far to fail now, and she was about to prove that the deadliest warriors aren't always the ones who make the most noise. The final evaluation phase of SEAL training was notorious for breaking even the most prepared candidates. Unlike the structured training exercises that had defined the previous months, the final phase was designed to simulate the chaos and unpredictability of real-world special operations. Candidates faced scenarios with incomplete information, changing objectives, and stress levels that pushed them beyond their training into pure instinct and character. For Sarah Chun, this phase represented more than just the culmination of her SEAL training. It was her chance to prove definitively that her unconventional communication methods weren't just adequate for special operations. They were potentially superior. But first, she would face a challenge that had nothing to do with her military skills and everything to do with the prejudices that still existed within the broader military community. The challenge came in the form of a joint training exercise with a Marine Force Reconnaissance Unit. The Marines participating in this exercise were among the most elite personnel in their branch, experienced operators who had served multiple combat tours and had earned reputations as some of the military's finest warriors. They were also, without exception, skeptical of the Navy's decision to allow a mute candidate to continue through SEAL training. The Marine unit was led by Gunnery Sergeant Michael Harrison, a 20-year veteran with combat experience in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several classified operations. Harrison represented the traditional military mindset at its most refined. He wasn't motivated by prejudice or malice, but by a genuine belief that special operations required capabilities that Sarah simply couldn't possess. "I've got nothing personal against this candidate," Harrison explained to his team during their pre-exercise briefing. "But special operations is about life and death decisions made in split seconds. When you're calling for close air support with enemy forces 50 meters away, you don't have time for hand signals and written notes. This exercise will show whether she's ready for real-world operations or whether she's been carried through training by politically correct instructors." Harrison's team consisted of 8 Marines, each with extensive special operations experience. Staff Sergeant James Parker had served as a forward observer, calling in artillery and airstrikes during some of the heaviest fighting in Afghanistan. Sergeant David Chun, no relation to Sarah, was a communications specialist who had coordinated multi-unit operations in complex urban environments. Corporal Mike Rodriguez had experience in direct action missions requiring precise timing and flawless communication. These weren't fresh recruits or training cadre. They were experienced operators who had proven themselves in actual combat. Their skepticism about Sarah wasn't theoretical. It was based on hard-earned knowledge about what special operations demanded. The exercise scenario was deliberately complex and stressful. Mixed teams of SEAL candidates and Marines would conduct a hostage rescue operation in a facility designed to replicate real-world challenges. The scenario included multiple buildings, civilian role players, opposing forces armed with simulation weapons, and time pressure designed to force rapid decision-making. Sarah found herself assigned to a team led by Sergeant Shun, with 3 other Marines and 2 SEAL candidates she had trained with. The irony of working with a Marine who shared her surname wasn't lost on her, but Sergeant Shun made it clear from the outset that family names were where any similarity ended. "Look, Chin," Sergeant Shin told her during the mission briefing, "I know you've done well in SEAL training, but this is different. We're going to be moving fast, making quick decisions, and dealing with unexpected problems. If you can't keep up with our communication pace, you need to let me know now." Sarah responded with her communication device. "I understand the requirements. I'm prepared to adapt to your communication protocols." The artificial voice drew skeptical looks from the Marines, who had never worked with text-to-speech systems in tactical environments. Staff Sergeant Parker shook his head slightly. "What happens when that thing breaks? What happens when you don't have time to type?" Sarah had prepared for these questions throughout her training. She pulled out her waterproof notepad and demonstrated her hand signal system, showing how she could communicate complex tactical information through visual means. The Marines watched politely, but their body language revealed their doubts. "Hand signals work for basic stuff," Corporal Rodriguez observed, "but what about detailed instructions? What about changes to the plan? What about emergency communications?" The questions were valid, but they also revealed assumptions about how tactical communication actually functioned in high-stress situations. Sarah had learned through her training that the most critical combat communications were often the simplest. Enemy positions, friendly locations, immediate danger warnings, and basic coordination signals. Complex instructions and detailed planning typically happened during preparation phases when there was time for more elaborate communication methods. The Marines' concerns reflected their experience with large unit operations where extensive verbal coordination was necessary, but they might not fully apply to the small unit tactics that special operations typically employed. The exercise began at 300 hours with teams infiltrating the target facility through different entry points. Sarah's team was assigned to clear the building's second floor and neutralize any hostile forces while searching for hostages. The Marines had developed a communication protocol that relied heavily on verbal confirmation and status reports. As they moved through the darkened building, Sarah immediately noticed aspects of the environment that the Marines missed. Her enhanced listening skills, developed through years of compensating for her voice, allowed her to detect subtle sounds that indicated the presence and movement of opposing forces. She could hear breathing patterns, footstep rhythms, and equipment noises that provided detailed intelligence about what they would encounter. But her attempts to communicate this information to Sergeant Shun were initially unsuccessful. The Marines' communication protocol required verbal reports, and Sarah's visual signals were interpreted as routine movement confirmations rather than detailed intelligence about enemy positions. The situation came to a critical point when the team approached a room that Sarah knew contained multiple opposing forces. Her enhanced hearing had detected at least 3 different breathing patterns, the subtle sounds of equipment movement, and positioning that suggested an ambush. She tried urgently to signal this information to Sergeant Shun, but the The team's focus on vocal communication prevented them from recognizing the importance of her warnings. Sergeant Chun led his team into what would have been a devastating ambush in a real-world scenario. The exercise controllers ruled that 2 Marines would have been killed and 1 wounded in the initial contact. The team's mission was effectively compromised before they had completed their primary objective. During the immediate after-action review, the Marines' frustration was evident. "We walked right into an obvious ambush," Parker said. "How did we miss the signs?" Sarah wrote quickly on her notepad. "I detected multiple enemy positions through audio cues. Attempted to signal threat, but communication protocol prevented effective warning." Sergeant Chun read the note and paused. "Chun, you're saying you knew there were enemies in that room?" Sarah nodded and demonstrated the audio cues she had detected, the specific sounds that had indicated enemy presence, positioning, and preparation for ambush. To the Marines, these sounds had been background noise. To Sarah, they had been detailed intelligence about tactical threats. "Why didn't you communicate this more clearly?" Rodriguez asked, his frustration evident. Sarah wrote another note. "Standard hand signals insufficient for detailed audio intelligence. Vocal communication required, but not available to me." The Marines found themselves facing an uncomfortable realization. Sarah had possessed critical information that could have prevented their tactical failure, but their communication system hadn't been designed to receive and process her input effectively. Corporal Martinez, who had been observing the team dynamics closely, offered an insight that surprised everyone. Maybe the problem isn't that Shin can't communicate. Maybe the problem is that we can't listen. The observation forced the team to reconsider their assumptions about effective tactical communication. Sarah's inability to speak had been viewed as a limitation, but her enhanced listening abilities represented a capability that none of them possessed. For the second iteration of the exercise, Sergeant Chun made a tactical decision that went against his training and experience. "Chun, I want you on point. Use whatever signals you can to communicate what you're hearing, and we'll adapt our communication to work with your methods." The change in approach proved transformative. With Sarah leading the movement and providing detailed audio intelligence, the team moved through the facility with a level of tactical awareness that exceeded anything they had achieved using traditional methods. Sarah's signals indicated not just enemy positions, but movement patterns, alertness levels, and tactical preparations that allowed her team to avoid ambushes and exploit opportunities. When they encountered a room with hostages guarded by opposing forces, Sarah's audio intelligence provided details that changed their entire tactical approach. She had detected that the guards were relaxed, positioned poorly, and not expecting immediate threats. This intelligence allowed the team to plan a coordinated assault that neutralized the threats without endangering the hostages. The Marines began to understand that Sarah's communication methods weren't inferior alternatives to vocal communication. They were different capabilities that provided tactical advantages unavailable through traditional methods. Her inability to speak had forced her to develop skills that enhanced the team's overall effectiveness. Staff Sergeant Parker, who had been most skeptical initially, found himself adapting his own methods to work better with Sarah's input. "Chun picks up things the rest of us miss," he admitted to his fellow Marines. "We've been so focused on talking that we forgot how to really listen." The success of the adapted approach attracted attention from Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, who had been observing the exercise with growing surprise. His expectation had been to document the communication failures that would validate his concerns about Sarah's suitability for special operations. Instead, Harrison watched Sarah's team perform with a level of tactical coordination and situational awareness that exceeded several of his most experienced Marines. Their innovative communication methods had proven not just adequate, but superior for the specific challenges they faced. This shouldn't be working as well as it is, Harrison admitted to Chief Williams, who had been observing alongside him. Maybe our assumptions about effective tactical communication need to be reconsidered, Williams suggested. But Harrison remained skeptical about the broader implications. One successful exercise doesn't prove anything. What happens when she faces real combat stress? What happens when communication systems fail and lives hang in the balance? The question would be answered sooner than Harrison expected. The final phase of the evaluation exercise was designed to push candidates beyond their training into scenarios that required pure instinct, adaptability, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. Sarah was about to face a test that would either validate everything she had worked to achieve or confirm the doubts of those who believed that special operations require traditional communication methods. The scenario would involve not just tactical challenges, but psychological pressure designed to break even the most prepared candidates. What Harrison and the other skeptics didn't understand was that Sarah had already been broken and rebuilt. The trauma that had stolen her voice had also forged her into something stronger and more resilient than anyone realized. She had learned to function under pressure that went beyond anything military training could simulate. The final test would reveal whether the quiet warrior who had been dismissed and underestimated throughout her journey was actually the most dangerous person in the room. 8 highly trained Marines were about to learn that the deadliest opponents are often the ones who have learned to turn their perceived weaknesses into unexpected strengths. Sarah stood on the threshold of proving that silence could be more powerful than the loudest battle cry, and that true strength sometimes spoke without ever making a sound. The final evaluation exercise was scheduled to begin at dawn, but Sarah Chun couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk at 400 hours, listening to the sounds of the base awakening around her. Her enhanced hearing, developed through years of compensating for her lost voice, picked up conversations from the instructor quarters that she probably wasn't meant to hear. "I still think this is a mistake," she heard Staff Sergeant Rodriguez telling Chief Williams through the thin walls. "Chin's done well in training, but tomorrow's exercise is designed to break people. When the pressure gets real, when split-second decisions mean life or death, she won't be able to communicate fast enough." "We'll see," Williams replied. "She surprised us before." Sarah had heard similar conversations throughout her training, but tonight they carried extra weight. Tomorrow's exercise would determine not just her own future, but whether the military would continue to consider candidates with unconventional capabilities. She was carrying the hopes and doubts of everyone who had supported her, and the skepticism of those who believed she would ultimately fail. The final exercise scenario was more complex and psychologically demanding than anything the candidates had faced. It was designed to simulate the chaos and moral ambiguity of real-world special operations, where clear-cut objectives gave way to rapidly changing situations that required instant adaptation and flawless communication. Sarah would be leading a mixed team of SEAL candidates and Marines in a scenario that combined hostage rescue, urban warfare, and counterterrorism operations. The exercise would take place in a facility specifically designed to replicate the challenges of operating in hostile urban environments, complete with civilian role players, opposing forces with realistic weapon systems, and time pressure that left no margin for error. But the real test wouldn't be the tactical challenges. The real test would be whether Sarah could lead a team of warriors who still harbored doubts about her capabilities when the pressure reached levels that had broken other exceptional candidates. Her team consisted of 8 of the most challenging personalities she had encountered throughout her training. Gunnery Sergeant Harrison had handpicked each member, claiming he wanted to give Sarah the best possible team for her final evaluation. But Sarah suspected Harrison's real motivation was to create a team that would expose the limitations of her communication methods under maximum stress. The team included Staff Sergeant James Parker, the forward observer who had been most vocal about his doubts regarding Sarah's ability to coordinate supporting fire. Sergeant David Shunn brought his experience in complex communication coordination and his skepticism about non-vocal communication methods. Corporal Mike Rodriguez represented the direct action mindset that emphasized rapid, clear verbal communication. From the SEAL side, Sarah would work with Lieutenant Jake Morrison, who had evolved from skeptic to cautious supporter, but still harbored concerns about her leadership capabilities. Petty Officer Davis had become one of her advocates, but he had never seen her operate under truly extreme pressure. 2 other SEAL candidates, Thompson and Wilson, remained uncertain about her abilities despite months of successful training together. The 8th team member was perhaps the most challenging, Corporal Lisa Martinez, a female Marine with extensive combat experience who felt that Sarah's accommodations undermined the progress that other military women had fought to achieve. I've spent my entire career proving that women can compete with men on equal terms, Martinez had told Sarah during their team meeting. Your special accommodations make it look like women need help to succeed in combat roles. If you can't communicate like every other warrior, maybe you shouldn't be here. The criticism stung because it came from someone whose opinion Sarah respected. Martinez had earned her place through exceptional performance under the same standards that applied to her male counterparts. Her concern that Sarah's accommodations might be perceived as weakness for all military women was valid and troubling. Sarah responded with her communication device. I understand your concerns. My goal is to prove that different capabilities can enhance team effectiveness, not to create special standards. Martinez shook her head at the electronic voice. Good intentions don't stop bullets, Chun. When this team needs leadership under fire, are you going to be able to provide it? The question hung in the air like a challenge that would define everything that followed. The exercise began before sunrise with team insertion into the mock urban environment. The scenario involved a terrorist cell that had taken hostages in a multi-building complex with civilian populations, unknown threats, and intelligence that was deliberately incomplete and sometimes contradictory. Sarah found herself in the unfamiliar position of team leader, a role that typically required constant vocal communication with team members, higher command, and supporting elements. The position had been assigned by Harrison specifically to test whether her communication limitations would prevent effective leadership under pressure. The first challenge came immediately during the planning phase. Traditional military planning involved detailed verbal briefings where team leaders explained objectives, contingencies, and coordination requirements. Sarah had to develop alternative methods for conveying complex tactical information to a team that was accustomed to vocal leadership. She used a combination of visual aids, detailed written plans, and her sophisticated hand signal system to communicate her tactical approach. But the Marines remained skeptical about whether this would work under pressure. This is fine for planning, Parker observed, but what happens when the plan changes? What happens when we need immediate adjustments based on changing tactical situations? Sarah had anticipated this concern. She had developed contingency communication protocols that allowed for rapid adaptation using pre-established signal codes and decision trees. But she knew that these methods would only be as effective as her team's willingness to trust and follow her leadership. The first phase of the exercise required reconnaissance of the target facility to identify hostage locations, threat dispositions, and tactical entry points. Sarah assigned herself to the reconnaissance team, knowing that her enhanced observation skills would be valuable for gathering detailed intelligence. Moving through the urban environment with Corporals Rodriguez and Martinez, Sarah immediately demonstrated capabilities that her teammates hadn't fully appreciated. Her heightened listening skills allowed her to detect sounds that provided detailed information about activities within the target buildings. She could hear conversations, movement patterns, and equipment noises that painted a comprehensive picture of the tactical situation. But communicating this intelligence to her team required real-time adaptation of her signaling methods. Sarah used a combination of tactical sketches, positioning demonstrations, and rapid hand signals to convey complex information about enemy positions, hostage locations, and security measures. Rodriguez, who had been skeptical about working with non-vocal communication, found himself impressed by the detail and accuracy of Sarah's intelligence gathering. "Chen's picking up stuff I'm not even hearing," he whispered to Martinez. "Her situational awareness is incredible." Martinez remained focused on the operational challenges. Intelligence gathering is one thing, but can she coordinate a complex assault with multiple moving parts? The question would be answered during the second phase of the exercise, which required coordinating a simultaneous assault on 3 different buildings while managing civilian evacuations and preventing hostage casualties. Sarah's tactical plan was more complex than anything she had attempted during training. It required precise timing, coordinated movement, and real-time adaptation based on changing tactical situations. Most challenging, it required her to maintain command and control over a dispersed team while coordinating with simulated supporting elements. The traditional approach would have relied on constant vocal communication between team elements, with the team leader providing running commentary on tactical developments and issuing verbal commands for coordination. Sarah had to accomplish the same objectives using alternative methods that her team was still learning to interpret effectively. She positioned herself at a central observation point where she could maintain visual contact with all team elements. Using a combination of pre-established signal codes, tactical positioning, and her communication device for complex instructions, she began coordinating the assault. The initial phase went smoothly. Sarah's detailed reconnaissance had provided accurate intelligence about enemy positions and security measures. Her team moved to their assault positions with efficiency that impressed even the most skeptical observers. But then the exercise scenario introduced complications designed to test leadership under pressure. Additional hostile forces appeared in unexpected locations. Civilian role players began moving unpredictably through the operational area. Intelligence reports indicated that hostages were being moved between buildings, requiring immediate tactical adjustments. This was the moment that everyone had been waiting for, the test of whether Sarah could provide effective leadership when everything went wrong simultaneously. Traditional tactical communication would have involved constant vocal updates, verbal coordination between team elements, and immediate verbal commands to address changing situations. Sarah had to accomplish the same coordination using methods that no one had ever tested under this level of pressure. She began by using her communication device to send text messages to team leaders, providing updated intelligence and tactical adjustments. But the device was too slow for rapid coordination, and the artificial voice drew unwanted attention in the tactical environment. Sarah switched to her advanced hand signal system, using positioning and gesture codes that she had developed throughout her training. But The signals were designed for direct visual contact, and the urban environment limited sight lines between team elements. For 30 seconds that felt like hours, Sarah struggled to maintain command and control as her team faced challenges that seemed to exceed her communication capabilities. Parker was calling for immediate guidance on engaging unexpected threats. Morrison needed coordination for civilian evacuation procedures. Martinez required updated intelligence on hostage locations. Traditional vocal communication would have allowed Sarah to address all these needs simultaneously through rapid verbal commands and coordination calls. Her alternative methods seemed inadequate for the complex, real-time leadership that the situation demanded. Then, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of trying to coordinate everything from her observation position, she abandoned the traditional command post approach and moved directly into the tactical environment where she could provide hands-on leadership through demonstration and direct guidance. Moving rapidly between team positions, Sarah used physical positioning and direct demonstration to communicate tactical adjustments. Instead of issuing verbal commands from a distance, she showed team members what needed to be done through her own actions and positioning. The approach was unconventional, but it proved remarkably effective. Sarah's physical presence provided immediate guidance that was clearer than any verbal instruction. Her enhanced situational awareness allowed her to identify and address tactical challenges faster than traditional command and control methods. When Parker needed guidance on engaging unexpected threats, Sarah positioned herself to demonstrate optimal firing positions and target priorities. When Morrison required coordination for civilian evacuation, she physically guided the evacuation routes and demonstrated handling procedures for non-combatants. Her team began to understand that Sarah wasn't trying to lead in the traditional way. She was demonstrating a different kind of leadership that relied on direct example rather than distant commands. "She's not telling us what to do," Martinez observed to Rodriguez between tactical movements. "She's showing us what needs to be done." The approach required Sarah to expose herself to significantly more risk than traditional command positions would entail. But it also provided her team with leadership that was immediate, clear, and adapted to the specific challenges they faced. As the exercise continued, Sarah's unconventional leadership style began to generate results that exceeded expectations. Her team's coordination improved, their tactical execution became more precise, and their ability to adapt to changing situations surpassed that of teams using traditional communication methods. The final phase of the exercise required the ultimate test of Sarah's leadership capabilities. Intelligence indicated that the remaining hostages were being moved to a location that would require split-second timing, perfect coordination, and flawless communication to prevent casualties. Sarah faced a decision that would determine not just the success of the exercise, but the validation of everything she had worked to prove. She could attempt to coordinate the final assault using her alternative communication methods, knowing that any failure would be attributed to her limitations. Or she could find a way to demonstrate that her different approach to leadership and communication could succeed where traditional methods might fail. 8 highly trained Marines were about to learn that the most effective leaders sometimes guide through action rather than words, and that true tactical communication often happens in the spaces between spoken commands. The moment of truth arrived at 1,247 hours, when exercise controllers introduced the final scenario complication that would test everything Sarah Chun had learned about leadership, communication, and tactical excellence. Intelligence reports indicated that the remaining hostages had been moved to a fortified position where rescue would require split-second coordination between multiple assault teams, precise timing of breaching charges, and flawless communication under extreme pressure. But the real test wouldn't be the tactical challenge itself. The real test would come in the form of 8 Marines who had been specially selected to participate in what Gunnery Sergeant Harrison privately called the final evaluation. These Marines weren't part of the original exercise scenario. They were Harrison's own hand-picked team, brought in specifically to test Sarah's capabilities under the most challenging circumstances possible. The 8 Marines represented the elite of their service. Combat veterans with multiple deployments, specialized training in close-quarters combat, and years of experience in high-pressure tactical situations. They had been briefed that they would be participating in a demonstration exercise designed to evaluate new tactical communication methods. What they hadn't been told was that the exercise was specifically designed to test whether a mute SEAL candidate could maintain tactical effectiveness when facing opponents who possessed every advantage that traditional military training could provide. Staff Sergeant Marcus Torres led the Marine team, bringing 15 years of special operations experience and a reputation for tactical excellence that was legendary throughout the Marine Corps. Sergeant Lisa Williams was a hand-to-hand combat instructor whose skills were sought after by special operations units throughout the military. Corporal David Park had earned recognition for his performance in urban combat environments where split-second timing meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The other 5 Marines each brought specialized capabilities: advanced marksmanship, explosive ordnance disposal, communications coordination, intelligence analysis, and tactical leadership. Together, they represented the pinnacle of what traditional military training could produce. The exercise scenario positioned Sarah's team as the rescue force, while the Marine team served as both hostile forces and the tactical opposition that would test whether her alternative communication methods could succeed against opponents who knew exactly what to expect from conventional military tactics. "This is the real test," Harrison explained to Chief Williams as they prepared to observe the exercise. "Chen has done well against training scenarios and cooperative team members, but can she succeed when facing experienced operators who are trying to defeat her?" Williams understood the stakes. This exercise would either validate everything Sarah had accomplished or prove that her success had been the result of accommodating instructors and artificial training environments. There would be no question about the legitimacy of the results. Sarah faced the briefing for the final exercise knowing that everything she had worked for would be decided in the next 2 hours. Her team, the 8 military personnel who had evolved from skeptics to cautious supporters, would attempt to rescue simulated hostages from a fortified position defended by some of the most capable Marines in the military. The tactical challenges were formidable enough without considering the communication obstacles. The Marines defending the position knew exactly how SEAL teams typically operated. They understood conventional tactical communication methods, standard breach-in, clear procedures, and the coordination techniques that special operations forces normally employed. But they had never faced an opponent who operated the way Sarah did. The final exercise began with Sarah's team conducting detailed reconnaissance of the target facility. Using her enhanced observation skills, Sarah gathered intelligence that revealed the tactical sophistication of their opponents. The Marines had positioned themselves with precision, established interlocking fields of fire, and created defensive measures that would challenge any conventional assault team. More importantly, Sarah's listening skills detected conversation patterns and coordination signals that revealed how the Marines were communicating and coordinating their defensive preparations. She began to understand not just where they were positioned, but how they were thinking and planning. This intelligence advantage represented something that traditional military training hadn't prepared the Marines to expect. They had positioned themselves to counter conventional tactics, but Sarah's unconventional approach to information gathering provided her team with insights that normal reconnaissance methods wouldn't have revealed. Communicating this intelligence to her team required Sarah to use every alternative method she had developed throughout her training. Visual diagrams, tactical demonstrations, and her sophisticated hand signal system conveyed details about enemy positions, defensive measures, and potential vulnerabilities. But her team members had learned to interpret her communication methods, and they understood the tactical picture she was painting in ways that would have been impossible months earlier. Chen's intelligence is incredible, Lieutenant Morrison observed to Petty Officer Davis. She's picking up details about their defensive setup that we never would have noticed. Corporal Martinez, who had been most skeptical about Sarah's capabilities, found herself impressed by the tactical sophistication of the intelligence Sarah had gathered. "She's not just telling us where they are," Martinez noted. "She's telling us how they're thinking." The assault plan that Sarah developed was unlike anything her team had executed before. Instead of relying on conventional breach and clear tactics that the Marines would anticipate, Sarah designed an approach that leveraged her unique intelligence and her team's adapted communication methods. The plan involved multiple diversions, coordinated timing that relied on nonverbal signals, and tactical positioning that would confuse opponents who expected conventional military communication patterns. Most importantly, it required her team to trust her leadership completely, even when they couldn't understand her tactical reasoning until it was executed. "This plan is either brilliant or insane," Staff Sergeant Parker admitted as he reviewed Sarah's written tactical outline. "I can't tell which." "Maybe both," Davis replied. "But Chen hasn't been wrong yet." The assault began at exactly 1,330 hours, with Sarah leading her team in a tactical contact with some of the most capable Marines they would ever face. The initial moments would determine whether months of adapted training and communication development could succeed against opponents who possessed every traditional advantage. The Marines defending the facility had positioned themselves to counter conventional tactical approaches. They expected coordinated verbal commands, standard military communication protocols, and assault patterns that followed established special operations procedures. Instead, they faced a team that moved with silent coordination, communicated through methods they couldn't intercept or interpret, and executed tactical maneuvers that didn't match any training scenarios they had encountered. Sarah led her team through the assault using physical positioning and demonstration rather than verbal commands. Her enhanced situational awareness allowed her to identify and exploit tactical opportunities faster than traditional communication methods would have permitted. When her team encountered the first defensive position, Sarah used positioning and gesture to coordinate a response that bypassed the Marines' prepared defenses entirely. Instead of engaging in the direct confrontation that the Marines expected, Sarah's team used alternative approaches that neutralized threats without triggering the defensive responses that had been prepared. Staff Sergeant Torres, the Marine team leader, found himself facing tactical challenges he had never encountered. "I can't predict what they're going to do," he reported to his team. "They're not following any tactical patterns I recognize." Sergeant Williams, monitoring the assault team's movements, was equally confused. "I can't even tell how they're communicating. There's no radio chatter, no verbal commands, but they're coordinated like they're reading each other's minds." The tactical advantage that Sarah's unconventional methods provided became more apparent as the exercise continued. The Marines had prepared to counter conventional tactics, but Sarah's approach was unlike anything in their experience. When her team reached the facility's main defensive position, Sarah faced the ultimate test of her tactical leadership. 8 highly trained Marines were positioned to defend against any assault, with overlapping fields of fire, prepared defensive measures, and coordination that represented the pinnacle of military tactical training. But Sarah had been observing their defensive preparations through her enhanced listening skills, and she had identified patterns and vulnerabilities that conventional reconnaissance wouldn't have detected. She knew how they were coordinating, where their attention was focused, and what tactical responses they had prepared. More importantly, she understood that their defensive preparations were designed to counter opponents who would communicate and coordinate the way they did. Sarah's team operated differently. The final assault required Sarah to demonstrate tactical leadership that went beyond anything she had shown before. Leading by direct example, she guided her team through a coordinated movement that neutralized the Marines' defensive advantages through timing and positioning that couldn't be countered by conventional defensive measures. Moving with silent precision, Sarah's team approached the defensive position using coordination methods that the Marines couldn't intercept or counter. Her physical leadership provided guidance that was more immediate and precise than any verbal command could have been. When the final moment arrived, the point where tactical success would be decided, Sarah faced 8 Marines who represented everything the military traditionally valued: vocal leadership, conventional tactics, and standardized training methods. In 30 seconds that would define her entire military career, Sarah demonstrated that different didn't mean inferior, that silence could be more powerful than the loudest commands, and that true tactical excellence sometimes came from approaches that challenged everything the military thought it knew about effective operations. Her team moved with coordination that seemed telepathic, neutralizing threats faster than the Marines could respond, and securing the hostages with precision that exceeded anything the exercise controllers had expected to see. When the exercise ended, 8 highly trained Marines found themselves looking at a woman who had just demonstrated tactical capabilities they hadn't known were possible. Sarah Chun stood silent among her team, having proven that the deadliest warriors don't always make the most noise. Staff Sergeant Torres approached Sarah after the exercise concluded, his expression reflecting a mixture of professional respect and tactical bewilderment. "I've been in special operations for 15 years, he told her, "and I've never seen anything like what your team just accomplished." Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, who had designed the exercise to expose Sarah's limitations, found himself confronting the reality that she had instead demonstrated capabilities that exceeded conventional military training. "I don't understand how this worked," he admitted to Chief Williams, "but I can't argue with the results." The other Marines who had participated in the exercise struggled to process what they had experienced. They had been outmaneuvered not by superior firepower or conventional tactics, but by approaches to military operations that challenged their fundamental assumptions about how warfare functioned. "She didn't beat us by being stronger or faster," Sergeant Williams observed. "She beat us by being different, by operating in ways we weren't prepared to counter." For Sarah, the validation represented more than personal achievement. She had proven that the military's definition of effective communication and tactical leadership needed to expand beyond traditional assumptions. Her success demonstrated that diversity in capabilities could enhance rather than compromise military effectiveness. But perhaps most importantly, she had shown that perceived weaknesses could become unexpected strengths when developed and applied with intelligence, dedication, and tactical sophistication. The 8 Marines who had been selected to test her capabilities became advocates for approaches to military training and operations that acknowledged the value of different methods and capabilities. They had learned that true tactical excellence sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. Chief Williams summarized the broader implications during the final evaluation debrief. Chin didn't succeed despite her communication differences. She succeeded because of them. Her alternative methods provided tactical advantages that conventional approaches couldn't match. Sarah Chun completed her SEAL training not as an exception to military standards, but as an expansion of what those standards could encompass. She had proven that silence could speak louder than words, that different approaches could achieve superior results, and that the deadliest warriors were often the ones others underestimated. The woman who had lost her voice had found something more powerful, the ability to communicate through action, to lead through example, and to prove that true strength sometimes came wrapped in unexpected packages. 8 Marines had learned that the most dangerous opponent is often the one who fights differently, and that the greatest tactical advantage sometimes belongs to the person who operates outside conventional expectations. Sarah Chun had become what she was always meant to be, not a mute SEAL, but a warrior who had turned silence into her greatest weapon.